Spinning top. Well now, continued Skarloey, as you can imagine, life was far from quiet for us on our little line. Oh, but it wasn't just our footplate crews who sometimes gave us some grief. Sometimes we'd have trouble with the station staff too. I remember one particular station master at Crovan's gate back in the 20s called Mr. Sykes. He was a short man and a particularly nasty piece of work. Always had some snide comments about us engines when we were late for some reason or another. I don't know what these railways are coming to, he would say, letting their engines come in at any old time. It's a disgrace. If I were in charge, I'd see to it that any engine who arrives even 1 second late just once is scrapped immediately. Of course, we engines weren't afraid to stand up to him. Listen, you, I would say to him, we can't always be on time. Sometimes accidents happen and we're delayed. We can only go as fast as the speed limits allow us. Pah! Excuses, excuses, he would say before disappearing into his office. Rheneas, Neil and I were annoyed by this, I can tell you. What a muckle nuisance yon Mr. Sykes is, Neil fumed one day. He was in the siding by the wharf, waiting as my slate trucks were being unloaded onto his goods train. What's happened? I asked. I was taking my trucks through yon station, and I was running late. All of us has been running ourselves ragged ever since Henry stopped in yon tunnel. I just shunted them into the sidings and was having a drink when yon Mr. Sykes came up, shouting the odds about my being late. I can't help it, I argued. We've all been rushed after our wheels these days. But he wouldn't have listened to me. All he said was that I shouldn't have wasted my time idling on the main line. What does he know, eh? I know what you mean, agreed Rheneas. When I was late with my coaches, he was furious. Kept going on about us being out of date and inefficient too. And on a day when I was having trouble steaming. Huh, with an attitude like that, I wouldn't be surprised if something happened to him. Oh, I get the feeling it will, I groaned. I could feel it in my frames too. As it was usually just Rheneas and I back then, we usually took the morning trains. Other engines would sometimes come too to help run the line, but they never stayed long for one reason or another. Anyway, the morning after our conversation, Rheneas couldn't start. His tubes felt clogged, and he wasn't making enough steam. Don't worry, the driver said. A good washout is what you need. So I was hurriedly put into steam, shunted Rheneas into the workshop, and fetched the coaches. It was market day, and everyone would be depending upon us to take them to the towns to do their shopping. There was nothing else for it. I would have to take the train myself. Come along, come along, come along, I puffed. Slowly but surely, Agnes, Ruth, Lucy, Jemima and Beatrice snaked after me. We're coming along, we're coming along, we're coming along, they chattered. They had long since learned it was best not to play tricks on us, and I had, in turn, learned how to look after them properly. No engine should treat their coaches roughly, lest they want to become a bucking bronco, so to speak. Anyway, I brought them to the platform, and who should meet me but Mr. Sykes himself. He looked at his pocket watch. 10 minutes late, he snapped. Well, come on then, what's your excuse this time? Got stuck in some mud? Threw someone into a bush? Or did you spend time cleaning up a mess you made? For your information, I had to move Rheneas into the workshops and take over from him. His tubes are clogged and he can't start. I protested. Pah! Laziness, that's all it is. Sheer bone-idle laziness. Mr. Sykes sneered. All you engines are good for nothing. Oh, excuse me, I argued. But if that's your attitude, why don't you work for a bus company instead? Why, you little... Mr. Sykes began, but luckily the guard blew his whistle and we felt it was time we went. Oh, I was in a right old temper as we made our way up the line. How dare he say that about Rheneas? How dare he? I seethed. Calm down, boy, said my driver. Grumbling about it will do no good. I sighed. You're right, I said. I'm sorry, driver. I just can't bear him some days. I know, Skarloey, he said. Look, there's the owner on the platform. We'll have a word with him. I looked ahead and was relieved to see him standing on the platform at Glennock with his young son, Handel-Brown II, and his nephew Charles, who I'm sure you'll all know would later be the Fat Controller. Hello, Skarloey, said the owner. You look glum. I am, sir, I said. It's that Mr. Sykes. He keeps making insulting remarks about us engines whenever we're late. He did so this morning when I arrived at the station. And I explained what had happened. I don't like it, sir, I finished sadly. I see, he said. He pondered for a moment. Neither do I, he said at last. Skarloey, could you take us up to Lakeside, please? I've got to drop off these two young rascals at home. Then I'll need you to take me on your last train down again this evening. There are a few things I want to say to Mr. Sykes about this. Oh, yes, sir, I said, feeling very relieved. So I took him and the two boys up to Lakeside and left the rest of the coaches there whilst I went for a drink. I whistled to Rheneas as he passed by with some slate trucks. His tubes had been cleaned out, and now he was taking over my work. It was a good thing too, otherwise trains would have run later than they already were. Then I was coupled up to my coaches and we made our way home. Luckily, all trains ran right on time for the rest of the day, and so we had no problems. But I had a nasty feeling that something would happen, and it did. That evening, I was waiting at Lakeside for the last passengers. Among them was the owner, who climbed aboard Lucy, who was just in front of Beatrice at the rear end of the train. There were no seats left aboard Agnes that day, you see, but we couldn't go just yet. Beep, 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 where's Mrs. Last? I asked. The driver and guard looked up and down the platform. We can't see her anywhere, remarked the guard. Well, you know how late she is, said the driver. We'll give her 2 more minutes and then we'll have to go. We can't stand around here all evening, not with old Sykes down there. Wait, oh please wait, called a voice. Everyone looked, and there was Mrs. Last running onto the platform as usual. I'm so terribly sorry, she said as she scrambled aboard Lucy. But I had to fetch some medicine for my father. He's very sick, you know, and I only just found out today. Oh, I had such a long wait at the chemist's too. It's all right, missus, chuckled the guard. You're here now, and pass on our regards to him, he said, before blowing his whistle and waving his green flag. He jumped into Beatrice, and we started off. I tried to make up for lost time, but it was no use. A herd of sheep blocked our line, and we had to wait while they were shooed back into their field. By the time we reached Crovan's gate, it was very late indeed. I had just been uncoupled and was about to run around when Mr. Sykes stormed up. Late again, he barked. Helping some stupid old lady, I'll bet. Oh, now don't you start, I groaned. I've tried to make up for lost time, but... Do you know what? Seethed Mr. Sykes. I honestly couldn't care less. What none of us noticed was that Neil was silently approaching the station with a fast goods train bound for Tidmouth. Mr. Sykes was standing just in front of where Barrow Crossing lay across the main line. He normally used this to get home, as he lived on the same side of the town as the works. You've had it far too good from me, he continued, turning on his heel. Just then I heard Neil give a whistle in alarm. Mr. Sykes, I said, hoping to catch his attention. And now I'm going to do something about it. The very first thing I'll do tomorrow is to go and see the owner, he continued. Mr. Sykes, I said, my voice rising, and see if he can stop being so ridiculously soft and lenient for one whole second to punish you. Mr. Sykes, I cried in sheer desperation. What? He demanded as he stopped suddenly. He soon found out what, as Neil rushed past him so close that the peak of his hat caught the box tank side and sent it spinning around 180 degrees like a spinning top. For a moment he just stood there, stunned into silence. Then, slowly, he turned around, his face blushing in humiliation and relief. I stood there, looking pointedly at him. Right next to me stood Mrs. Last and the owner, both with very thunderous expressions on their faces. They had heard and seen everything, and had made their way through the crowd of passengers to join us. So, I'm a stupid old lady, am I? Mrs. Last exclaimed. Soft, am I? Lenient, eh? The owner said. Well, Mr. Sykes, you wanted to see me tomorrow, and you shall. My office, 9 sharp. Mr. Sykes didn't say anything. Instead, he turned away, uncharacteristically silent, and walked home, looking very shamefaced indeed. And that was the end of it, Skarloey concluded. We still saw Mr. Sykes after that, as a shunter up at the Slade Mines. Aye, agreed Neil. A well-deserved demotion and no mistake, especially after how he treated us and spoke about Mrs. Last to her face. The visitors yawned and stretched. Thank you, Skarloey and Neil, for such wonderful stories, they said. But we must be getting home now. The exhibition's nearly over. Goodbye, called Skarloey, and thank you for listening. One by one, the visitors left the exhibition hall, until only Ali remained with the engines. I wish I could attend your twins' anniversary celebrations this year, especially the event that they're planning for your railway, he sighed wistfully. Why can't you? Asked Skarloey. He was surprised. This was the first he'd heard about an event on his railway. Because I can't afford the prices, and I've got too much work going on for me at the moment. This was just a break for me, said Ali sadly. But then he gave a small smile. But I hear that bits of the event are going to be streamed live on the internet, so I can still watch some of it. And when I do, I promise I'll be thinking of you, he said. Skarloey didn't know what Ali meant by streaming or the internet, but understood what he was saying. Indeed, he said. No matter how far apart we are, there'll always be some way we can stay connected. I'll be thinking of you also. Goodbye, Ali, and good luck with your work. And the old engine smiled as Ali waved and waved until he rounded the bend and disappeared out of sight through the double doors to the exhibition hall.